Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The rain poured hard over the Cole family estate, thunder rolling like a warning. Inside the marble hall, Elena stood in her sister's wedding gown, lace sleeves trembling around her wrists. The scent of white lilies filled the air, too sweet, almost suffocating. Her reflection in the mirror showed a stranger. Beneath the silk veil, her lips trembled not from cold but from fear. She was not supposed to be here. The bride was her sister Sophia, but Sophia had vanished the night before the wedding, taking with her a trail of scandal, debt, and humiliation. Their father's business was collapsing. Their mother was desperate to keep their family name clean. And so they turned to the quiet one, the obedient one, the invisible daughter. "Elena, please," her mother whispered, pressing the bouquet into her hands. "Just walk down that aisle. Save us. No one has to know. No one has to know." The words echoed like a curse. Across the hall, the groom waited Adrian Cole, 32, tall, composed, and cold as the storm outside. His sharp features barely moved beneath the weight of duty. Billionaire CEO of Cole Industries, he was a man used to control. Every deal, every signature, every vow was calculated. But tonight even he seemed distant, haunted by the absence of the woman he thought he loved. The doors opened. Music swelled. Elena took one slow step forward. Her heels echoed on the marble floor, the veil brushing against her shoulders. Adrian's eyes met hers through the thin lace. He did not notice the difference. Maybe he did not care. Maybe love had already turned into another business transaction. The ceremony passed in fragments. The priest's voice was muffled beneath her heartbeat. "Do you take this man?" "I do." The words left her lips before she could stop them. When Adrian slid the ring onto her finger, she felt the weight of a life she never chose. Outside, cameras flashed. The world saw beauty and wealth, a perfect union of power and grace. But behind the smiles, behind the champagne toasts, was silence. Later that night, in the grand mansion overlooking the city, Adrian spoke without turning toward her. "Our marriage will remain private. You will have everything you need, but understand this is an arrangement, nothing more." Elena nodded, her voice caught in her throat. "I understand." He looked at her, then his eyes unreadable, a trace of sorrow hidden behind the glass of restraint. "Good. You will find the guest room prepared for you." She stood alone in the vast corridor after he left, surrounded by portraits of women who looked like they belonged, polished, proud, untouchable. She did not. Her reflection shimmered on the marble floor like a ghost. That night she sat by the window watching the storm fade over the city lights. She had married a man who did not even know her name. But somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered that fate had not finished its work yet, and neither had love. The next morning, sunlight crept through the tall glass windows of the Cole mansion, painting gold lines across the marble floor. Elena woke to silence. The room felt too large, too perfect, like a museum where she did not belong. Her wedding ring caught the light cold against her skin. She slipped it off for a moment, staring at it in her palm. It felt like proof of someone else's life, not hers. A soft knock came at the door. A woman in a gray uniform entered. "Good morning, Mrs. Cole. Mr. Cole asked me to bring your breakfast." The title made Elena's stomach twist. "Mrs. Cole." The words sounded borrowed. "Thank you," she said quietly. The tray held everything fresh, berries, croissants, coffee steaming in a porcelain cup, the kind of breakfast people saw in magazines. But she barely touched it. All she could think about was the moment in the ceremony when Adrian had not even looked at her face. When he said, "I do," as if reading a contract. Later that day, she wandered through the mansion's long corridors. Oil paintings lined the walls, all faces of the Cole family, stoic, perfect generations of wealth frozen in paint. She stopped before a portrait of Adrian, as a young man, maybe 20, smiling faintly beside a woman she did not recognize. There was warmth in that smile, a kind that was missing now. She turned at the sound of footsteps. Adrian stood at the end of the hall, hands in his pockets, his dark suit perfectly pressed. "You are awake," he said. His voice was calm, controlled. "Yes," she answered. I was looking at the portraits. My father insisted on them," he said, walking closer. "Every generation had to hang their legacy on these walls. He believed reputation is what outlives us." Elena hesitated. "And what do you believe?" He paused just long enough for her to notice. "That reputation is heavy," he said finally. "And sometimes it kills love before it can even begin." The words hung between them like mist. She did not know what to say. He turned away first. "I have meetings all afternoon. The staff will attend to whatever you need. We will discuss the terms of this arrangement tonight." When he left, she felt the air lighten and then collapse again. The house seemed emptier without his presence, yet somehow his shadow lingered everywhere. By evening, Elena found a small room at the far end of the west wing, a forgotten library. Dust covered the piano. In the corner, its keys yellowed with time. She brushed her fingers over them and pressed one. The note rang out soft but clear. She sat down, playing an old melody she used to practice at the town church when she was young. The sound filled the room, fragile but alive. For a few moments she forgot who she was supposed to be. She forgot the deal, the fear, the lie. She was simply a girl who loved music. She did not notice Adrian standing in the doorway until the song ended. His expression was unreadable. "You play well," he said. Startled, she rose. "I am sorry, I did not mean to disturb anyone." "You did not." His tone softened slightly. "I've not heard that song in years. My mother used to play it." Something in his voice cracked the shell of distance between them. Elena's eyes lifted. "It is a beautiful piece." He nodded. It was her favorite. He stepped into the room, resting a hand on the piano lid. "You are different from what I expected." She blinked. Expected. He studied her for a moment. Sophia was never one for quiet things like music. Her heart skipped. He still believed she was her sister. "People change," she said quickly, looking away. "Maybe." His gaze lingered for another second before he straightened. "Dinner will be served at 7. Do not be late." When he left, she exhaled shakily, her pulse racing. The lie tightened around her like the lace of her wedding dress, beautiful on the outside, suffocating underneath. That night at dinner, Adrian sat at the head of the long table, reading through documents while she barely touched her food. The rain had returned, tapping against the windows like a steady rhythm. He spoke without looking up. "You will continue to appear as my wife in public events. You will have freedom within the estate. In return, you will respect my privacy. After 3 months, this arrangement will end quietly. You will be free to go." Elena nodded. "I understand." Adrian looked up, then his eyes steady, his tone unreadable. "Good. I do not expect complications." But as she met his gaze, Elena felt something stir, pity, curiosity, or perhaps the faint beginning of something neither of them wanted to name. When the clock struck midnight, she stood on the balcony outside her room. The city below shimmered in the rain. Somewhere in that maze of lights was the world she had lost. Yet as thunder rolled again, she realized her story was no longer out there. It had begun right here inside this mansion, beside a man she barely knew, one who might just change everything. The following weeks settled into a quiet rhythm that felt almost unreal. Every morning, Adrian left early for the city, his driver waiting by the front gate before sunrise. Every evening, he returned just as the mansion lights came on, always composed, always distant. Elena saw him at dinner, exchanged a few polite sentences, and then the silence would swallow the room again. The house itself became her world. She filled her hours exploring the hidden corners, the rose garden behind the fountain, the glass conservatory that smelled of citrus, the quiet balcony that overlooked the misty hills. But her favorite place remained the small library where the old piano waited. There she played in secret the melodies, her only form of prayer. One night, as her fingers drifted across the keys, she heard a voice from behind her. "You play that same piece every night." She turned. Adrian stood in the doorway. Again, his tie loosened, his eyes tired but softer than usual. "I did not realize you could hear from the hall," she said. "I can," he replied, walking closer. "I am beginning to think you do it on purpose." Elena smiled faintly. "Perhaps I do. Music makes the house feel less empty." Adrian leaned against the piano, studying her face in the dim light. "You seem comfortable here now." "I try to be," she said quietly. "Comfort is sometimes an act of survival." His expression shifted, something like surprise crossing his features. You speak like someone who has lived through more than comfort. She met his gaze. Everyone has something they do not talk about. For a long moment neither spoke. Then Adrian straightened, his usual calm returning. I am hosting a charity event next week. You will need to attend as my wife. I will have the staff arrange a gown and brief you on the guests. The mention of wife sent a chill through her, a reminder of the lie she was still living. But she nodded. Of course. When he left the room, she closed the piano slowly. The sound of the keys fading felt like a heartbeat disappearing into silence. Days passed quickly after that. Designers came and went, measuring her for a dress she could barely afford to imagine. Makeup artists discussed colors. Fabrics shimmered under the golden light of the sitting room. She stood before the mirror, barely recognizing the woman reflected there. The girl who once taught children to draw was gone. In her place was a woman wrapped in satin and secrets. On the night of the gala, the mansion buzzed with energy. Luxury cars lined the driveway, the media lights flashing against the rain-slick pavement. Adrian appeared at the top of the staircase in a black tuxedo, crisp and immaculate. When he saw her descending the stairs, something unreadable passed across his face. You look different, he said simply. Different good or different bad, she asked softly. He hesitated, then said, good. For the first time, his compliment did not sound like courtesy. He offered his arm. She took it, her pulse quick beneath her skin. Cameras clicked as they stepped into the ballroom together. Inside, chandeliers glowed like constellations. The air was full of perfume and soft laughter. Adrian guided her through conversations with executives, politicians, and socialites. She answered carefully, remembering his earlier warnings to smile but say little. But when the orchestra began to play, and couples moved to the dance floor, Adrian turned to her unexpectedly. Would you like to dance? Elena blinked. Are you sure people will be watching? Let them, he said, extending his hand. As he led her to the floor, she felt the room blur. His hand on her back was steady, his movements graceful and sure. The music swelled, and for the first time since the wedding, she did not feel like a stranger in his world. For a moment she was just a woman in a man's arms, lost in a waltz beneath 1,000 lights. When the song ended, applause filled the hall. Adrian released her hand slowly, his gaze lingering longer than it should have. You surprised me tonight, he said. How so? You seem like someone who belongs here. Elena smiled faintly. Maybe I am just a good actress. Adrian's eyes softened, almost amused. If that is true, you are convincing. Before she could reply, a familiar voice cut through the air. Adrian. He turned. Elena froze. Standing at the edge of the ballroom was her sister Sophia, elegant, confident, alive. The room seemed to tilt. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Sophia smiled, a practiced smile that did not reach her eyes. Did you miss me, darling? Elena's world stopped. Adrian looked between the two women, confusion flashing across his face. Sophia, he said slowly, disbelief in his voice. Sophia's eyes shifted to Elena. Well, she said, her tone sharp as glass. I see you found a way to make yourself useful, little sister. Every head turned toward them. The music had stopped. The lie that had held everything together was about to break. And as Adrian's expression hardened, Elena knew there would be no hiding anymore. The truth was coming for both of them. Silence fell so hard that even the chandeliers seemed to stop shimmering. Cameras stopped flashing. Every eye in the ballroom turned toward the two sisters standing face to face under the golden light. Adrian's jaw tightened, his confusion breaking into disbelief. Someone tell me what is going on, he said, his voice low but sharp enough to slice through the tension. Elena opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her throat felt dry, her heart thundering against her ribs. Sophia took a step forward, her red gown sweeping the marble floor. Allow me, Sophia said sweetly. You see, Adrian, you were never supposed to marry her. That was my dress, my ring, my fiancé. But my family, our dear family, decided she would make a better substitute when I disappeared. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Elena whispered, Sophia, please not here. Why not here? Sophia snapped. You have already lived in my house, slept in my room, worn my name. What else is left to steal? Adrian's eyes turned to Elena, searching for an answer that might make sense. But there was none that could erase the lie. It is true. Elena finally said, her voice trembling but steady enough to be heard. I was forced to marry you to protect the family. Sophia ran away the night before the wedding. My parents begged me. I did not want to deceive you, Adrian. I never wanted this. The crowd buzzed with whispers again. Phones already raised to capture the scandal. Adrian stood silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but the calm was worse than anger. Congratulations, he said. You fooled me better than anyone ever has. He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing like thunder in the ballroom. Elena stood frozen as the world blurred around her. Reporters were already shouting questions. Sophia smirked. You always wanted my life, she said quietly, just loud enough for Elena to hear. Now you can have the shame that comes with it. By the time Elena escaped to the back hallway, tears had already blurred her vision. She did not stop running until she reached the service door behind the kitchen. The cold night air hit her like a slap. The rain had started again, soaking her hair and dress as she stumbled into the dark. She walked for miles without knowing where she was going. The city lights flickered in the distance like distant stars she could never reach. When her legs gave out, she found a bench near the river and sat shivering. The diamond ring still glimmered on her finger, mocking her. She pulled it off and clutched it tightly. I never wanted this, she whispered. Across town, Adrian sat alone in his office, the skyline burning through the glass walls. The documents he had been reviewing hours earlier were still on the desk untouched. He had built his empire on logic, precision, control. But tonight, nothing made sense. He remembered the way Elena had played the piano, the way her laughter had filled the empty hallways, the way she had looked at him, not with greed, but with something painfully real. He wanted to hate her, but hatred refused to come. In its place was confusion and something else he did not want to name. The next morning, the story was everywhere. The wrong bride scandal flashed across every news site. Paparazzi camped outside the Cole mansion. The board of directors demanded explanations. Adrian faced them with his usual composure, but inside he felt hollow. By evening, he asked his assistant, Moinder, Mrs. Cole? The man asked cautiously. Her name is Elena, Adrian said quietly. Find her and make sure she is safe. Meanwhile, Elena returned to the small apartment she once shared with her parents. The place smelled of dust and old memories. Her mother burst into tears the moment she saw her. Do you know what you have done? She cried. The Cole family will destroy us. Maybe they should, Elena said softly. We destroyed ourselves first. Her father, frail and tired, reached for her hand. You did what you thought was right, my child. Sometimes right looks wrong to the world. That night, Elena opened her sketchbook, the one she had carried before her life changed. Between pages of faded drawings, she found an unfinished portrait of Adrian drawn from memory. She added one more line, then closed it gently. Days turned into a quiet blur. She worked at a local art store, blending into the ordinary world she once longed to escape. Yet every time she heard a piano, she thought of him. One evening as she was closing the shop, a sleek black car stopped outside. A man stepped out, Adrian. He looked different, less guarded, more human. Elena, he said softly. She froze. Why are you here? Because I needed to see you. You should hate me. I tried, he said. But hate does not erase the truth. You lied, yes, but you also gave me honesty in every other way. You were real when everything around me was pretend. Tears filled her eyes. I ruined your reputation. Adrian shook his head. Reputation can be rebuilt. What matters is what we build it on. I want to start over. Not as a contract, not as a lie. Elena looked up at him through the tears, unsure if she could believe it. The rain began to fall again, soft and steady, the same rain that had witnessed their beginning. Adrian extended his hand. Let me take you home. For the first time, Elena hesitated, not out of fear, but hope. She placed her hand in his. The storm eased and the city lights glowed brighter, as if even fate had been waiting for this moment to begin again. Elena did not speak on the drive back to the mansion. The sound of rain against the windows filled the silence between them. Adrian kept his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the wheel. When the mansion came into view, it no longer looked like a fortress of glass and stone. It looked tired, almost human, just like them. He parked near the front steps and turned toward her. You do not have to come in, he said quietly. I only wanted to bring you somewhere safe. Elena shook her head. This place stopped being safe a long time ago, but I came because I need to understand why you still care. Adrian leaned back in his seat. For the first time since she met him, he looked unsure. Because when the truth came out, I realized something. I was angry that you lied, but I was angrier that I had spent years around people who never told me the truth at all. You were the first person who did, even when it broke everything. Elena looked down at her hands. I did not mean to hurt you. I know, he said simply. That is why it hurts differently. They stepped out of the car. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, the air cool and clean. Inside, the house was quiet. The staff had been dismissed days ago to avoid reporters. The grand hallway echoed with their footsteps. Adrian stopped in front of the piano room. You should play, he said. Elena blinked. Now, he repeated. She sat down, her fingers hesitating over the keys. Before finding the melody, she always returned to the one that had filled this room with life when everything else felt empty. As she played, Adrian walked to the window and watched the rain slide down the glass. The music wrapped around them like a confession neither could say aloud. When the final note faded, she whispered, What happens now? Adrian turned toward her. Now we tell the truth. The next morning, he called a press conference at Coal Industries. The board members protested, warning him against further scandal, but he stood firm. Cameras lined the room as he faced them with calm certainty. Many of you have heard rumors about my marriage, he began. The truth is the woman I married was not the one I was meant to, but she is the one who taught me what honesty means. Her name is Elena Cole, and while our beginning was a lie, everything that followed was not. The reporters fell silent. Adrian continued, The Cole Foundation will sponsor a new program under her name, the Elena Initiative for young artists from small towns who deserve a chance, because she reminded me that value is not born from privilege, but from persistence. Later that evening, Elena watched the broadcast replay from the library. When she heard her name, her breath caught. She never expected him to defend her publicly, let alone honor her through something that gave back to others. The door opened behind her. Adrian stepped in, still wearing his dark suit, his expression soft. You saw it, he asked. She nodded. You did not have to do that. Yes, I did. You gave me truth. I gave you justice. For a long moment they stood in silence, the tension between them finally easing. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I was going to wait, he said, but life does not always wait for perfect timing. He opened the box, revealing a simple silver ring, elegant and unpretentious. No contracts, no expectations, just choice. Will you let me start again with you? Tears welled in her eyes. Adrian. He stepped closer. You once said comfort is an act of survival. I want to build something with you that feels like living, not surviving. Elena covered her mouth with trembling hands. Yes, she whispered. I will. Adrian slipped the ring onto her finger, the same hand that had once carried the weight of deception. Now it carried a promise freely made. Weeks later, the Cole mansion was no longer silent. The piano room had been turned into an art studio, sunlight spilling across canvases and sketches. Elena worked with young artists every weekend, their laughter echoing through the hallways. Adrian often stopped by with coffee, pretending he came to check progress, but staying just to watch her smile. One afternoon, as the students packed their things, Elena found him standing by the window again. You never stop working, she teased. I work less now, he said, because I finally have something worth coming home to. She laughed softly and walked over to him. Do you ever regret it? The chaos, the scandal, the wrong bride. Adrian reached for her hand, his thumb brushing the silver ring. It was not the wrong bride, he said. It was the only one fate meant for me. Outside, the sky began to clear. The same rain that once marked their beginning now washed everything clean. As the light poured in, Elena leaned her head on his shoulder. The house felt alive again, filled with art music and something stronger than either of them had dared to hope for. And in that still moment, she realized that love, the real kind, was never arranged by families or contracts. It was chosen again and again by two people brave enough to tell the truth. Months passed, and the scandal that once filled every headline slowly faded into memory. People moved on to new stories, new dramas, and the world stopped pointing at their names. But inside the Cole mansion, something quietly bloomed. It was not the loud kind of love, but the steady living kind, like a candle that refused to die out, no matter how the wind tried. Elena's art studio had become a sanctuary. Young painters came every weekend, filling the grand halls with colors instead of rumors. The once cold marble floors were now scattered with canvases, laughter, and paint-smeared sneakers. Adrian often stood by the door pretending to read reports while secretly watching her teach. One Saturday, as the students left, Elena found him leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You are terrible at pretending," she said, wiping her hands on a rag. He smiled. "Pretending to work, pretending that you are not proud," she teased. He stepped closer, brushing a streak of blue paint from her cheek. "I am proud," he admitted, "of you, of this place, of what you have turned it into." She blushed, shaking her head. "It was your idea." "No," he said. "The idea was mine. The heart was yours." Their eyes met, and for a moment the world seemed to still. He leaned down and kissed her forehead, a simple grounding gesture that said everything words could not. That evening, they hosted the first charity showcase of the Elena Initiative. The ballroom that had once witnessed humiliation now glowed with art and hope. The same journalists who once printed their downfall were now writing about the program that changed lives. As guests admired the paintings, one of the students, a teenage girl with shaking hands, whispered to Elena, "I never thought someone like me could be seen." Elena smiled gently. "The world only changes when someone decides to see it differently. You are doing that right now." Adrian watched from across the room, pride softening his usual stern expression. When their eyes met, he raised his glass to her. She smiled back, the kind of smile that came only from peace hard-earned. Later that night, after the last guest left and the lights dimmed, Adrian found her alone in the ballroom. She stood in front of one of her paintings, a landscape of rain over the city skyline, glowing with hidden light. "You painted that storm," he said quietly, standing beside her. "I did," she replied, "because even storms have light if you wait long enough." He looked at her for a long moment. "You waited for me, did you not?" Elena turned to face him. "No," she said softly. "I just learned not to run away from the rain." Adrian reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. "I have something for you," he said. Inside was a deed. Her name was written in elegant ink. "The Cole Art Center," she read aloud, stunned. "Adrian, what is this?" "A home for artists who have nowhere to go," he said. "You once gave me a reason to rebuild. Let this be yours." Tears filled her eyes. "You cannot just give me an entire building." "I can," he said, smiling faintly. And I did. Elena laughed through her tears. "You are impossible." "Maybe," he said, "but you married me anyway." She stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I would again." He pulled her into his arms, and the room fell into a stillness filled with quiet gratitude. There was no contract this time, no bargain, no obligation, only choice, pure and certain. Weeks later, the Cole Art Center opened its doors to the public. Reporters covered the event, but this time the story was not about wealth or scandal. It was about redemption, second chances, and love that rebuilt instead of destroyed. During her speech, Elena said, "Once I thought fate forced me into a story I did not choose. But maybe fate only gives us the pages. We decide what to write on them." The audience applauded, but Adrian stood silent at the back, his eyes full of something deeper than pride, admiration, devotion, and peace. That night, back at the mansion, the rain began again, gentle and familiar. They stood by the window watching the drops streak down the glass, their reflections side by side. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked. "The wedding," he replied, "every day. Because it was the beginning of everything that mattered." Elena smiled and rested her head against his chest. "It was the worst mistake that became the best decision." Adrian kissed her hair softly. "No," he said. "It was never a mistake. It was just fate taking the long way home." Outside, lightning flickered far away, and the city glowed beneath the rain. Inside, two people who had once been strangers stood together, not because they had to, but because they chose to. And for the first time, the mansion that once symbolized power finally felt like home, love. Millionaire Fiancé Danai. Winter came early that year. Snow dusted the roofs of the Cole estate, turning the garden into a quiet sea of white. Inside that the house was warm, filled with soft light and the scent of cinnamon. The once empty mansion now echoed with life students visiting the art center, family friends, and laughter that replaced the silence that had haunted its halls for so long. Elena sat by the window sketching the frost-covered roses in the garden. She wore one of Adrian's sweaters, its sleeves slightly too long, and her hair fell loose over her shoulders. She heard footsteps behind her before she felt his arm circle gently around her waist. "Good morning," Adrian murmured against her hair. "You are up early again. I wanted to finish this piece before the light changes," she said, smiling. "The snow only looks like this for a few hours." He looked down at her sketchbook. "You still see beauty in things everyone else overlooks. That is the trick to surviving," she said, "finding beauty before it disappears." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Then promise me you will never stop seeing it." Outside, the first cars began to arrive. It was the day of the annual winter fundraiser for the Elena Initiative. The ballroom had been transformed again, twinkling lights, garlands, and walls lined with paintings by her students. The event would raise enough money to fund hundreds of art scholarships across the state. By evening, guests filled the room. Elena moved gracefully through the crowd, greeting donors, introducing young artists, and occasionally glancing toward Adrian across the room. He stood near the fireplace, talking with investors, but his eyes found hers every time. When the speeches began, Adrian stepped onto the stage. A year ago, he began his voice steady. "This house stood as a reminder of everything I thought mattered: status, success, reputation. Tonight it stands for something else: second chances." And that began with one person. He turned toward Elena, who stood near the front, her eyes glistening. "She taught me that truth and kindness build more than any empire ever could. She turned every failure into art, and she made this place a home." Applause filled the room, but Adrian's gaze stayed locked on hers. He stepped down from the stage, walked to her side, and took her hand. "Elena," he said softly, "I know I have said this before, but I will say it every day if I have to thank you for not giving up on me." She smiled through tears. We did not give up on each other. Later that night, when the guests had gone and only the fire remained, they sat together on the floor of the grand hall. Snow fell outside, glowing in the moonlight. Elena leaned against him, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "Do you ever wonder where we would be if that wedding had never happened?" she asked quietly. Adrian chuckled, probably both miserable in very different ways. She laughed softly. "Fate has a strange sense of humor." He looked at her with warmth in his eyes. "Maybe fate just knew what we needed before we did." The fire crackled and the world outside faded to stillness. In that peaceful silence, surrounded by everything they had rebuilt from ashes, Elena whispered, "I think this is what forever feels like." Adrian tightened his arms around her. "Then let us keep it that way." And as snow continued to fall outside, covering the traces of the past, the two of them sat together in the glow of everything they had fought for, proof that even the most broken beginning can end in something beautiful. Spring arrived, softly melting the last traces of snow around the Cole estate. The gardens bloomed again, bursting with roses, tulips, and lavender. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, painting golden patches on the floor, where Elena often sat to draw. The mansion that once felt cold and distant now felt alive, echoing with warmth, laughter, and the gentle hum of new beginnings. On a quiet Sunday morning, Adrian found her in the library. She was rearranging art supplies for the next class at the Cole Art Center, her hair tied loosely, a pencil tucked behind her ear. He stood in the doorway, watching her for a moment, smiling to himself. "You know, he said the house staff think you work harder than I do." She looked up, grinning. "That is probably true." He walked closer, slipping his hands into his pockets. "I came to tell you we received the official invitation from the mayor's office. They want to honor the Elena Initiative at the city gala next month." Her eyes widened. "They do? That is incredible." "It is more than that," he said. "You are going to give the keynote speech." Elena froze, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. No. "Adrian, I cannot. I am not that kind of person." He smiled gently. "Yes, you are. You speak from the heart. That is why people listen." She looked at him for a long moment, then sighed. "Fine. But if I faint on the stage, it will be your fault. I will catch you," he said softly. Weeks later, the gala night arrived. The city hall glittered with lights, cameras flashing as dignitaries entered. Elena wore a simple ivory gown, elegant but modest, while Adrian looked every bit the confident CEO at her side. As they walked through the crowd, whispers followed them, not of scandal, but of admiration. The couple who had once been a headline for all the wrong reasons now represented hope, redemption, and truth. When it was time for her to speak, Elena stepped up to the podium. Her hands trembled slightly, but Adrian's reassuring nod steadied her. I used to think, she began, her voice clear but tender, that fate wrote our stories for us, that we were trapped inside it, powerless to change the ending. But I learned that love, real love, rewrites everything. She paused, scanning the room filled with faces. I was forced into a life I did not choose, but through honesty and forgiveness, that same life became something beautiful. So to anyone who feels stuck in someone else's story, I say this: pick up the pen, start again. The audience rose in applause. Adrian's eyes glistened with pride as he watched her speak her truth to the world. When she stepped down, he took her hand and whispered, "You just made me fall in love with you all over again." Elena smiled, her cheeks flushed. Then I must be doing something right. That night, as they left the gala, the city lights shimmered over the river. Adrian stopped by the bridge where it all began, the place where fate had once twisted their lives together. He turned to her, the cool spring air brushing between them. "Elena," he said quietly, "we started as a lie, then we survived the truth. But what comes next is ours to build." She looked up at him, the stars reflecting in her eyes. "Then let us build it slowly," she said, "brick by brick, promise by promise." He smiled, pulling her close. "That sounds like forever to me." And as they stood on that bridge, the night wrapped around them gently, no longer filled with secrets or fear, only peace in the kind of love that had finally earned its name. Summer came with golden light spilling through every window of the Cole mansion. The gardens were in full bloom, alive with color and laughter. Children from the art program ran across the grass with paintbrushes in their hands, their bright voices echoing against the marble walls that once knew only silence. Elena stood at the balcony watching them with a smile that reached her eyes. Below, Adrian was helping a group of volunteers set up easels for the outdoor exhibition. His sleeves were rolled up, his tie forgotten, and there was a small streak of blue paint across his wrist where one of the students had accidentally brushed him. He looked up and caught Elena watching from above. For a moment, their eyes met, two people who had survived the storm and found peace on the other side. When the event began, the lawn filled with families, artists, and visitors from across the city. The paintings shimmered under the sunlight. Some were portraits, some abstract, all filled with hope. A local reporter approached Elena with a microphone. "Mrs. Cole, how does it feel to see all of this come to life?" Elena smiled. "It feels like watching a promise keep itself. Every brushstroke here is proof that healing is possible even after the hardest beginning." As the afternoon faded into evening, the final piece of the exhibition was unveiled, a large canvas painted by Elena herself. It showed a stormy sky clearing over a mansion surrounded by light, and at the bottom corner were two small figures walking hand in hand. The crowd fell silent for a moment before breaking into applause. Adrian stood beside her, pride glowing in his eyes. "This is beautiful," he said quietly. "It is our story," she replied. "Every storm, every mistake, every second chance." The sun dipped lower, painting the world in soft gold. The guests began to leave, the laughter fading into the hum of crickets and the rustle of summer leaves. When the last car disappeared down the driveway, Adrian took Elena's hand and led her to the rose garden. Lanterns hung from the branches, their warm light flickering in the evening breeze. He stopped in the center of the garden and turned to her. "Do you remember the first night we stood together here?" Elena laughed softly. "How could I forget? I was terrified, and you barely said 3 words to me." Adrian smiled. "And now I cannot imagine a day without hearing your voice." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I know we have already promised each other forever," he said, "but I want to make it official this time. No family, no contract, no pretense. Just us." He opened the box. Inside was a new ring, simple but radiant, shaped like a tiny infinity loop. Elena gasped softly as tears welled in her eyes. "Adrian," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You do not have to. I want to," he said, his tone gentle but certain. "Because love is not what started us. Choice did." and I choose you every day in every way." Elena covered her mouth, unable to speak. The night around them glowed with lantern light, the garden perfumed with roses and summer air. She nodded through her tears. "Yes," she said, 1,000 times yes." Adrian slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms. They stood beneath the sky that once witnessed their pain, now bright with peace. As the camera of life seemed to pull away, the last image was of them, two souls who began with lies but ended with truth. And the voice that lingered softly over the scene said, "Sometimes love does not arrive through perfection or plans. Sometimes it comes through storms, through mistakes, through grace. But when it stays, it turns every wrong beginning into the best ending you could ever imagine."